Dr. Imam Abdullah Hakim Quick is an author, historian, and lecturer. He was born in the USA. He is of African American, Caribbean, and Mohawk Native American descent. He was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, June 25th, 1949. The exact date is there. And grew up in Boston. He converted to Islam in Canada in 1970. So although born in the US, we can claim that he became Muslim in Canada, alhamdulillah. Big up Canada. He received a bachelor's degree from the Islamic University of Medina in 1979. He was one of the first 2 students from the West and the first American to have done so and received an ijazah. He received his master's degree and PhD from the University of Toronto. His thesis was an analysis of the life and writings of Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, a great West African scholar, warrior, and social activist. Over the past 4 decades, Sheikh Quick has traveled to 62 countries where he has lectured at universities, mosques, and public events. He has also served as an imam, teacher, counselor, and media consultant in the USA, Canada, South Africa, and the West Indies, specifically in Jamaica, where he was an imam. He is currently a senior lecturer with the Islamic Institute of Toronto and the outreach coordinator with the Canadian Council of Imams. He is also the history department head and a lecturer at the Al-Maghrib Institute and advisory committee member at the Islamic Online University. And he really is one of our distinguished leaders. He is a mentor to many of us, including myself, and many of us who actually came to Islam a generation or 2 ago. We can count Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick as a teacher, as one who inspires us, and we're very, very happy to call him a resident of Canada and one of our beloved teachers. And so let's welcome our dear Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-Awwaleen wal Akhirin Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Wa ba'd. All praises are due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be constantly showered upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, his family, his companions, and all those who call to his way and establish his sunnah to the day of judgment. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it is a great privilege to be here with my brother Amir Muhammad. And I want to, at the outset, congratulate him and to pray that Allah would strengthen him and the Institute, the American Islamic Museum. Because this work of understanding history, understanding our roots in the Americas and the world, I believe is one of the most important areas that Muslims can be involved in outside of the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Why do I say that? Because to a great extent, the world, the perception of the world is being influenced by information. As we were driving through Washington, D.C., and we looked at the monuments, we looked at the White House, and the Pentagon is there. But what really stuck out for me is museums. And you see all types of museums that is there. The Library of Congress, where it was said that every book ever written, supposedly, is inside the Library of Congress. This is information. And part of power is not just a physical thing, but it is an intellectual, mental, and psychological. And so it's crucial right now at this point in time for young people, for people of conscience, of all different nationalities and religions, but especially for Muslims in the Americas, to understand where we came from, what is our position here, and where we are going. And this is critical because there are words being used. We are hearing, send her back, in dealing with Ilhan Omar. We are hearing, comments being made about Muslims as though we are aliens on these shores. Racist statements being used. We also see the native indigenous people struggling for their rights. the Latino people struggling for their rights, and African Americans struggling for rights, reparations. But a lot of this is based upon information. And that information, that understanding of history, is something which is enshrined in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the ulama looked at the book of Allah, they recognized that 1/3 of the Quran is history. 1/3. Al-Qasas. Qasas al-Anbiya. The stories of the prophets and the great ones and the nations that came before us. So any proper Islamic studies course, any proper understanding of Islam should be strengthened by at least 1/3 historical narratives, the understanding of the people who came before us, and our understanding as who we are right now. And in this light, we have been victims of a great deceiver. There has been a great deception that has gone on in the colonial period, where not only the bodies of people were enslaved, but the minds were enslaved. You could say it is not only colonialism of the body and the political system, but it is the colonialism and slavery of the mind. And if the body is freed and the mind is still in slavery, then that person is still a slave. And so we need to be able to look at history. We need to be able to develop an understanding or a methodology in approaching the information that is coming to us and putting it in the right perspective. And because our time is limited, I want to go straight into this topic, but we understand that one of the great deceptions, to give probably one of the best examples of the great deceptions, is the information, the fact, so-called fact, that we were taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. And I traveled to different parts of the world, and I asked the people who discovered America, and they said Christopher Columbus in 1492. And recently, it was only in 2017, with all the information that is there, with all the different positions being taken by people in academia, they still built replicas of two of the boats of Columbus, the Nina and the Pinta. And in August of 2017, they built it in the south, took it up from South America along the coast, and it went into the Great Lakes. And so you can say that this concept of discovering America is a type of intellectual imperialism. It's intellectual imperialism. Because the question is that we have to ask, which the child would ask, I asked as a young person, which is not rocket science. And that is, if Columbus discovered America, then what about the people who are already living there? How can you discover a place if people were living there already? I would say Abdullah Hakim discovered Alexandria, Virginia in 2019, because I just got here. That's imperialism. Right? That is denying the history of the people who lived here and imposing myself on their history. And this is so critical because people's minds, it's almost like a covering over our minds. And the fake news industry, which is constantly bombarding us and bombarding our youth, is not only continuing with this information, but it is bringing new constructs. And so we need to know how to deconstruct history. That means to take apart information and then put it together in the best possible way, the most objective way, put it back together in order that it is more, it is including the story of all peoples. When we look at the Americas, we recognize that indigenous presence has been here for thousands of years. Some say between 10,000 to 20,000 years. And I was shocked to find out that in this part of the world, it is estimated that when Columbus came, over 75 million people were living here. Think about this. 75 million people. And in 1492, there were over 2,000 mutually exclusive languages. 2,000 languages. And when I say the Americas, I'm talking about Canada, US, Caribbean, Central, and South America. And so the notion that he discovered it is an insult, because Columbus himself was lost. He thought he was in India, and so he called the people Indians. You're not in India. But it's still being used. I think they want to bring the Washington Redskins back here. It's an insult to the indigenous people to think like this. But still, Columbus, when he returned to Spain, he couldn't properly explain to the Spanish authorities where he had been. They outfitted him again, and he came back into the region. Columbus never made it onto the mainland. His son Ferdinand made it to Central America. And he found hanging gardens, he found pyramids, he found an amazing civilization. And so to deconstruct it and put it back together, and we look at the reality of the people, and again, this is a pyramid of the indigenous people, the Mayan people. If you can adjust your eyes, lighting's not so good. You see these white dots? These are people. These white dots here are people. So look at the size of this structure. In order to build a structure like this, your civilization had to extend back over 1,000, maybe thousands of years to develop the technology to build a structure such as this. So in actuality, if I had my chance to write the book, and the curriculum is the Holy Grail, I would say that Columbus was discovered in 1492. See the difference in the two? Because he was lost and he bumped into America on his way to India. And so what this would be is not his story, but it would be our story. And so this is what we're talking about. We want to look at the Americas from our perspective in order to gain the right information, because people who do not know their history will be lost in the present. And so I want to look at waves of Muslims coming. We're going to step back a little bit in order to go forward, because the issue that I'm dealing with really is the Caribbean, Central and South America. Okay, we had Canada, United States will come, but in order to deal with this huge region, you have to step back in time and reanalyze our understanding of Muslims and our civilization. The reality is that what is known as the Dark Ages was actually the golden age of Islam. And the Dark Ages from 400 to 1500 AD, really you could say, and I'm just arbitrarily using these figures, 1622 to 1492 approximately, this is a golden age for us. This is where Muslims were highly advanced. And surprisingly enough, because this is not just a physical science thing, this is based right on the message of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Because he taught, as we know, Tawheed. And Tawheed, Aqeedah, this is wahada yuwahidu, that is to make things unified or to make things one. It is not only Tawheed of our concept of the Creator, but it was also unifying humanity, and also it was a unification of knowledge. So sacred knowledge and secular knowledge, we recognize all coming from the same source. And the Prophet ﷺ, many traditions, one of them, seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Muslims went out. And when Muslims went out from Arabia, not with large imperialist armies, with a small number of people, after being attacked by the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire, then Muslims responded to the attacks and continued taking the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as far as they could in the world. And with this concept of seeking knowledge, they actually ran into civilizations, storehouses of knowledge. Alexandria, Egypt, Constantinople. They ran into the great capitals, monasteries, temples. And it is reported that one of the Khalifas, and this is in the Abbasid period, and this Khalifa, he put together what was known as Baitul Hikmah. And this is Ma'mun. And he developed, this is the 9th to the 11th century. And what they did was, they would pay the weight of gold to anybody who could bring a text, bring knowledge they didn't have. And when they studied topics, they would invite in experts from all religions. So for instance, you're studying the concept of zero. You bring in not only Muslims, Jewish, Christian, Hindus, Buddhists. The Hindu man said, oh, we had a concept of zero. We had this concept from ancient India. It was also in ancient Egypt. And so they Islamized the concept. And it became known as Sifr, that we now call zero. And the Muslims really, the achievement, and this is a big subject in itself, the great achievement is that they were able to take theoretical knowledge and put it into a precise, practical form. And so by doing this, they revolutionized the world. To give you an example of this, the development of the magnetic needle, okay, this really is developing your compass. Okay, so the first compass, true compass, was developed by Muslims. How many schools are actually teaching something like this? Okay, you can continue on, there's so much, but I'm just going to touch on a few. This is an interesting one. You remember Al-Ma'mun, he's in Baghdad, and it's a huge city. And there's a lot of, there's a serious issue they have in dealing with the division of property, with inheritance, with zakat and agriculture and so much. So he needed to have a science of fractions, how to divide things up. So he went to Al-Khwarizmi, one of his scientists, and said, bring me a science, put it together. And so he developed, and you can see it here on the board, Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala. So he developed it, and it came out in a book, and you can see it, Kitab al-Mukhtasar, an abbreviated version, fi Hisab al-Jabr. Algebra. So algebra is an Arabic word. How many schools teach this to their students? This is where it began. And this is just one point in so many areas that Muslims were advanced in. For us, because of our study, we want to focus now. One of the areas where Muslims were actually very advanced was in the areas of astronomy, navigation, historical things, because we naturally have an issue of direction. When we want to pray, we need to know where Mecca is. Okay, if you want to make pilgrimage, you need to have a map. If you're coming from Indonesia, if you're coming from the high mountains in the Himalayas, you want to go to Mecca. So a number of texts were developed where information was there. You literally get what they used to call the AAA, we call it CAA, the American Automobile Association. Today, you Google it. Okay, but before we used to get this book, you want to travel to California, so they give you a book and it shows you the best route to take. It discusses things around it. There were literally travel guides that were developed by Muslims. Okay, and these set the pace. Also, the Muslims developed instruments like the astrolabe, quadrants, sextants, compasses, and so forth and so on. And maps, they began to draw amazing maps. And in 1517, and this starts to get really in our topic now, because we want to focus on the Americas. In 1517, Piri Reis, a great Turkish scholar, he presented a set of maps to the Ottoman Sultan Selim I. And what is shocking about his maps is that, and we see it today, that in one set of his maps, he showed the coastline of South America. And if you can see this, this is like from Guyana coming down, that's Brazil. And it's shocking because the coastline that he showed is almost exact. The latitude and longitude is almost exact. How could Piri Reis have a map in 1517 like this? when Columbus supposedly discovered America in 1492. This is hard evidence now. And many historians, they want hard evidence. How can you say there's a wave of Muslims or people before Columbus? Also, we have al-Mas'udi's map, and this is where he pointed on the map and he said, Ard Majhula, unknown territory. This map coming out around 957, and if I flip it around here, you can see on the map, if you follow the pointer, okay, remember this is the 10th century, right? Look at the map. This is now China, see Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, there's the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, Africa, look at Turkey, Spain, Scandinavia. Okay, but down here, he said unknown territory. That there is a territory out there. And so this is within our records. And there are a number of reports that are similar to this. We had the technology, we had boats. The Arabs had the dhow. There were ships that could travel distances. We also knew about currents. There are currents that travel throughout the ocean. Some people would say today, well, this is not true because there's no European scholar who has spoken about this. That's not true. Thor Heyerdahl, the Scandinavian Norwegian scientist, he took a boat, and this is where he traveled in the 60s from Safi, Morocco. He traveled across using the currents. And the currents naturally take you across right into Barbados. He landed in Barbados in the West Indies. And so he proved it. He took another one across the Pacific too, by the way, the Kontiki. And so he showed that people could have traveled across these oceans in the ancient times. What does that have to do with us? I ran across, after having learned Arabic in Medina and gone into my studies, started reading a lot of books in Arabic. And you find in the writings of al-Mas'udi, Muruj al-Dahab wa Ma'adan al-Jawhar, he is considered to be the Imam of the historians, al-Mas'udi. And al-Mas'udi wrote about the journey of Khashkhas ibn Sa'id, who early in the 10th century went across, he reached land, he came back to Spain, Al-Andalus, and everybody there knew about the journey of Khashkhas. He brought back goods with him. There is also Abu Bakr ibn Umar al-Qutiyya, 999, talking about the journey into the Sea of Darkness, and then coming back. Sharif al-Idrisi in the 11th century, Kitab al-Mamalik wal-Masalik. In his text, and this is, I've actually translated this in the book Deeper Roots, so you could read it. In his text, he spoke about the journey of Muslim seafarers who went into the ocean, Atlantic Ocean. They reached an island, and they were captured. They went to another island, and the king spoke to them with an interpreter who could speak Arabic. And he said, the journey is about a month or so between you and me. These are the islands of the Caribbean, maybe the Bahamas that they reached. And this is in our text. And there are other amazing texts as well where they are talking about journeys going across the ocean in this wave. And the ancient Americas, it's different. If you get a lot of these historical maps, it's very interesting because if you look at America, go back a couple centuries, you'll see France. All this green here is France. New France, Louisiana. Okay, the British, they have the pink territory. The Russians even had a piece of America too, Alaska. Okay, the French, okay, Portuguese had probably the most fertile piece of land. That is Brazil. The Spanish, of course, had all this area, New Spain, coming down. And this is interesting because all of this area, which they stole from the indigenous people, okay, was all part of the indigenous lands. So when you're talking about build a wall, where are you going to build the wall? Because when you're high into California, all the way up almost to the Canadian border, you're in Mexico itself. So where are you actually going to build the wall? But a lot of our understanding and things happening to us is based on ignorance. Ignorance of what went before us. The reality of the people of the Americas. You know, and it is so heart-wrenching to see what is happening to the immigrants now, the destroyed societies, where people have to run from their land to America, caught at the border, being misused. If you look at Central America, there was the great Aztec civilization. This is a very famous civilization. There is also the Mayan civilization. This is where you see the pyramids that are there. Go back, you even find Olmecs. These are all points I'm putting out for people who are into history. Okay, things that you can study. Study Olmec civilization. This is an ancient civilization. And the Mayans had a calendar that could equal anybody's calendar. There is also, in South America, there is the Inca civilization. And when they flew over the top and looked down on the Inca civilization in Peru, they found that in the ancient times, this area that they controlled was as large as any city in the world. And it was built on a grid. They literally organized their civilization, and this is in the ancient world. When you speak about the Caribbean islands, you have to realize it is a complex society. It's not a simple discussion. This is so many islands, which is in the 1,500-mile territory. And the indigenous people, sometimes called Arawak and the Caribs, very sensitive people who had high philosophy, who had stable societies. And this is something which is almost totally wiped out by European colonialism. Now I want to again go back to our texts. One of the texts which is an important one, and that is the 14th century Al-Umari. Al-Umari in his Masalik al-Abra fi Mamalik al-Amsar. He wrote about the journey of a great Muslim leader whose name was Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, who came from the Empire of Mali. And in 1324, Mansa Musa made pilgrimage to Mecca. He carried 72,000 people with him. He had 15,000 camels laden with gold. He changed the economy of every country that he reached. Google his name. No, better still say, who is the richest man who ever lived on earth? Pound for pound. Rothschild, Rockefeller. It's Mansa Musa, a black African Muslim leader. Pound for pound, he had more wealth at his disposal than any human that they have known in history up until now. And Al-Umari, though, to make a long story short, he interviewed Mansa Musa, and he found out that his older brother, his predecessor, Abu Bakr, that he went into the Atlantic. He took his wealth, and he went into the Atlantic with 2,000 ships. 2,000 ships. And he crossed over, and if you look at the west coast of Africa and then look at Brazil, you will see the current will take you right there, or right into Barbados. 2,000 ships he went in, and there are inscriptions that were found in Brazil, in Peru, even up into the United States. And even Harvard University scholar Leo Weiner, in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America. This is now early 20th century. He was talking about the Mandinka Muslims, Mande, West African Muslims, who traveled right up into the United States. And it's shocking when we look at their journey, which was across South America into Central America and up. You'll see their inscriptions that have been recorded, where they are talking about different issues, about concepts of life, but you find these Mandinka inscriptions throughout the area. I'm moving fast because of the time. What is really interesting is that Alexander von Wuthenu, this is a European professor of art history in Mexico City College from 1939 to 1965. He had a display of terracotta figures and masks. He was showing the presence of Africans in Mexico before Columbus. And this display, which is scientifically checked out, found that Muslims are all over the region. If you look at this one, that Van Wissenu had. You can see here the scarification, which many West African nations had. Look at this. This is a turban and a cap. Right? That's before Columbus in Mexico. That's clearly an African man. That is not a Latino face. The scarification is clear, the turban, right? So Van Wissenu made it very clear, and he showed that when Balboa came, when the Spanish conquistadors came, and they came into the area, Balboa writes about coming into Panama. And the indigenous people there said to him, don't go over by the Caribbean side. There are black people there with beards, and they're fierce. So Balboa went straight north. And you find presence of these people within the anthropology of Panama and Central America. These are indigenous people. And they are talking about these traces all over the place. And Ivan van Sertima, very famous author in this area, this is some interesting work which is being done. And Van Sertima put together a number of things. This is Alexander von Withenu's book, okay, Unexpected Faces in Ancient America, if anybody wants to research. But what they found out is that there's similarities. And they found the women, many of the women there, with their gold, they would make it so heavy that the earlobe sinks down. That's similar to the Fulani Fulla people in West Africa. And the Mandinka people, remember Mansa Musa had so much gold, right? He had it like size of grapefruits. Okay, so when you give the dowry in the wedding, you will give a woman, serious amount of gold, right? Not a few US dollars with nothing to back it up, right? And then she would wear her maha. She would wear it, right? She would preserve it for the families. Same thing was found in Honduras, okay? And so they journeyed throughout this area, and this is the first wave that was coming in. These are some of the inscriptions found in Arizona, where it is saying that elephants are sick and angry, and is amazing, okay? Again, Honduras, there's a group of people who call themselves El Mamis, right? And this is the West African word coming from Imamu El Mamis. There's a tribe with that name, okay, in Central America. Also the name Jaras, Guaba, Caba, it's all over Central America. These are indigenous names that were found there. Also, when the Spanish came, Cortez, he even writes that they found the cloth, and the Spanish wrote about boats coming past them. And it had cloth similar to Granada that they knew from Spain, Al-Andalus. Okay, so what we are understanding now is that the indigenous people, the traces of them still exist today. This is the first wave. They are known as Garifuna, the Garifuna people. When the British came, and the British have a way of, explaining everything away. And they said, no, they're black Caribs. You have Caribbean Caribs, right? Usually reddish, light. They said, no, they're black Caribs. But how can you say these are escaped slaves or black Caribs? When the Spanish came, they were already there. Doesn't make any sense. Okay? This is a distinct group. And alhamdulillah, the Garifuna people, they maintain monotheism. They religiously do not eat pork. They have a number of Islamic ways about them. And alhamdulillah, recently, many of them in Belize and along the coastline there, they are embracing Islam, and they are returning, as one of the indigenous peoples of the area. Columbus, going back to him, when he found gold, because Columbus was looking for gold, the native people called it guanin. They say guanin. And the Spanish were shocked to find out, because they used to get gold from Guinea, West Africa. They were shocked to find out that the gold has the same alloy as the gold that used to come out of West Africa. Because you put your gold along with copper and silver and other things in order to couch your gold, it's the same alloy. And the West African word kane, kanin, ghanin, Okay, this is a Mandinka word. Okay, so this now is the first wave into the region there of the Caribbean. And these are the islands that they came into. And surprisingly enough, and this is interesting, you know Turks and Caicos? There's islands there. And most people say, okay, Turks and Caicos, the Turks were over there? No, when Columbus came, he saw this is a cactus plant. Okay, and it's got like a red, see the red fez on the top? So he said, Turcos, these are Turks. He was so paranoid of Muslims. And when he saw the plants, he even thought about Turks. So up until today, they call it the Turks and the Caicos. The Lucayan people, and this is a sad story about this wave, the things that were going on then. The Lucayan people who were living in the Turks and the Caicos and in the northern Caribbean region, they were actually wiped out in most of the islands 100%. 100%. They killed the indigenous people. And so this first wave is a painful one. And to piece it together is not an easy process. But there is more and more information for us to show more and more people are recognizing that Columbus is not the first person. He's not even the first European, as we heard earlier. The Vikings were here, right? More and more information is coming to the surface about the first wave. The second wave is the slave trade. And this Atlantic slave trade, and these are the ports of call coming out of West Africa, Central Africa. And you can see where the people are going to throughout the regions there. And you'll see that a number of these places were actually Muslim places. For a long time, it's only like about 30 years ago or so, that they even admitted that there were Muslims amongst African people. The lie that was being taught is that the Arabs enslaved Africans, and you hear this discussion all the time when they talk about Islam, slavery, right? The Arabs enslaved West Africans and Central Africans, you know, and then they came across. There was no Arab, the Arabs did not make it to West Africa. They did not make it down to the coastlines there. So that's impossible for that to have happened. What we do recognize is that somewhere between 15 to 30% of the African slaves and political prisoners who came into the Western Hemisphere were Muslims. This information is getting stronger and stronger by the day. And it's not difficult to really find it. It's a matter of knowledge, right? It's understanding ethnicity, understanding the flow of Islam, right? To know the story of the movement of Islam amongst people. It's our story, right? You can easily decipher this. The first Muslims that came into American slavery, Senegambians, the Wolof, and they were very powerful people. In 1522, the Wolof made a rebellion, and they fought in Hispaniola, which is now Dominican Republic and Haiti. They also made rebellion in Puerto Rico and in Panama, and the Portuguese even said, no more Muslim slaves. Don't bring any more of them over here, because rebellions that were going on. Still, people want to deny this. What is the proof? Because this is what's going to come to you now. How can you say this? Okay, the proof is coming from a number of eyewitness reports, written documents, and some of it is here on display in the book Deeper Roots. Written documents, autobiographies, right? Records written in Arabic language, because we use Arabic as a lingua franca. Even the indigenous languages of West Africa, we would use Arabic script or Arabic itself in order to write. And alhamdulillah, because we are a nation of the word, right? First came the al-Wahi, the revelation, then the Wahi was put into a written form, right? So that is what you could call cultural continuity. It's something which is all over the Muslim world. And you can travel throughout the Muslim world. You can speak to people, scholars especially in Arabic. You can see their writings in Arabic. It's something from the Quran itself and our source, right? Which is a cultural continuity of Muslims throughout the world. I was surprised to find a number of things. I just want to give you a taste of it. I was in the Bahamas in Nassau in the Bahamas. And so I asked the people there, about Muslims in slavery. And they said, well, we're not sure, but we can give you a couple books. Now, I found this book. I want to show you how we decipher this. This is a missionary's report, 200 years, right? 1701 to 1900, okay? And within this report, and I'll go right to the source itself, if you go down here, it said in 1802, Mr. Rose removed his residence to Exuma. Any of you been in the Bahamas? It's the island of Exuma. It's a famous island in the Bahamas, right? And on Christmas Day, dedicated the new church. And then it goes on further. It said, the inhabitants then consisted of 140 whites, 35 free people, and 1,078 Negro and other slaves. On his first coming, many of the Negroes called themselves the followers of Mahomet. There it is. There it is. Mahomet is the medieval way of saying Muhammad. They identified themselves as Muslims on the island of Exuma. But the cover-up is going on up until today. And I was shocked. Just this year, there was a big Muslim group that went to the Bahamas. I went there with them. And as you're entering the airport, they say the island of Exuma. And what is the most interesting thing about Exuma today? They have swimming pigs. They have pigs that swim. I don't know how they did that. So people go to Exuma to see pigs that swim. I wanted to go do some research about Muslims, but they got pigs swimming all around the place, right? So they're trying to keep us out of there, right? It's part of the cover-up that is going on. And so Arabic documentation, I asked the archivist, do you have anything written in Arabic by the slaves? She said no, but there's something in Amharic, which is an Ethiopian language. And they brought me the text. It was Arabic. It was Muslims seeking refuge in Allah from the shaitan, right? It's Arabic documents, but they didn't know how to decipher the West African Arabic that is there. Let's look at some of the other areas in the Caribbean region and South America. Francois Macandal. People know about the Great Haitian Revolution. Haiti was the first island or country to decolonize. Okay, but the revolution in Haiti was developed on the plantations. And two of the great leaders on the plantation were Muslim scholars, Macandal and Bookman. They are known as Marabu. We say Morabit. We say Morabit, Al-Morabitun. They're famous in West Africa, right? So Macandal is famous for starting the revolt. The great general Toussaint Louverture organized the rebellion, right, and defeated the French. Go over to Jamaica. Muhammad Kaba from Buka, from Malinke of Guinea. He was studying to be a judge, and he was captured at 20 and deported to Jamaica. Okay, Abu Bakr Siddiq. He's a cleric from Timbuktu, right? This is a famous university city. He was captured and taken to Jamaica in 1834. And he wrote extensively in Arabic. He was writing. And there was a British magistrate, Robert Madden, who was sent to Jamaica in order to oversee slavery going to indentured labor, right? And he had served time in the Ottoman Empire, so he could speak Arabic. And he found African Muslims speaking Arabic, writing Arabic to the countryside. So it was widespread throughout the areas. And if you look at Jamaican history, and one famous group called Maroons, you heard it mentions, Maroons are the escaped slaves. When the Spanish brought Africans there, some strong Africans, they rebelled and they went into the interior. So they said Cimarrones, which mean wild horse, right? So Maroons. So any of the escaped African slaves would run to the interior of Jamaica, and they were so powerful that they defeated everybody. Up until today, the Maroons have their own constitution. They're an independent nation inside of Jamaica. And we found there interesting information. You'll find some of the great leaders, Nani of the Maroons, Sam Sharp, and you'll find interesting information. We actually found a place up in a place called, in the Trelawney area, there's a place called Jum'ah Hole. Okay? Where they still call it Jum'ah Hole, where the Muslims used to make Jum'ah there. Right? So there's definite proof amongst the Maroons, of the presence of Muslims there in Jamaica. Okay? And one of the rebellions of the Maroons was partially defeated. It was a standoff. So the British allowed them to emigrate, and surprisingly enough, some of them ended up in Nova Scotia, in Canada, and many of them went on to Sierra Leone. Okay, but our reality is, it was a struggle. Two places I want to mention, and you'll find especially some texts about it, here and online. One is Trinidad. In Trinidad, there was a strong presence of African Hausa Muslims and Mandinka Muslims. They were so powerful that they freed themselves and they formed a free Muslim society in Trinidad. And whenever a slave ship would come into the area, they would see if there are any Muslims or someone interested in Islam, and they would take them to their own territory outside of Port of Spain. And it is reported that they had shura, consultation, they had an emir, they were growing crops, and when there was a big famine in Trinidad, they actually fed the capital city. Also in Brazil, in 1835, there was a major slave revolt in Bahia, in Brazil. And it was so powerful that the Portuguese said to some of them, because they had emir, shura, they had organization, it was an amazing group. They were so powerful, the Portuguese said, take boats, go back to Africa. And right now, I was surprised when I visited Lagos a couple years ago. There's a Brazilian mosque in Lagos, Nigeria. And the Nigerians say it was built by the slaves who won their independence, returned to Africa, and they built their masjid there. And the lineage is still there going on. But the reality is, it's a long story in this wave. The suffering, the brutality of slavery, father separated from mother, language being taken away, names being taken away, that Islam, to a great extent, was a faint memory. And I won't go into the 20th century. I'm going to leave some of this to our brother Amir. But you'll find that the African Muslims were known for their tawheed, their unity, their monotheism and inclusion, tahara, that's the purity of mind and body and spirit, and al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar, calling to righteousness and forbidding evil. And it is because of the rebellions that went on in the Caribbean and in the United States and the abolitionist movement that slavery was abolished. Don't think it was because of the good nature of the European colonial system. No. They couldn't handle the rebellions that were going on. And the British, being crafty people, led it. They led this abolition. And so you find abolitionist societies were developed, anti-slavery movements, and in 1807, slavery was officially abolished in the British Empire. What did the British do? He said, it's such a dirty word, slavery, we're going to make something new. They called it Indentured Employment Solutions, right? This is their solution, right? How do you get people to do the work of the slaves? It's called the indentured labor system, okay? It's really a British scheme. What did they do? They went to India and to Indonesia and Malaysia, and they literally hired people to come to the Americas to serve for a period of time. This is an actual contract there, where you see the contract of the indentured labor. Many cases like here, you would generally work for 5 years. You're supposed to be provided free housing and free medical attention. And 1839, here, this is the indentured system begins. Where did they come from? The ports of call, 9/10 of the Indian immigrants who came into the Americas were from the Ganges Basin and embarked at Calcutta. Okay? And then the remainder were from Madras. Right? So this is more in the south. 1/6 of those people who came were Muslims. The rest of them were Hindus. Okay, so these are the places. These are the ports of call there from Calcutta and Chennai. Right? These are the ports of call where the Indian people were taken. This is you could say a third wave. Okay, the indentured labor wave. Okay, and this migration came, and between 1838 to 1924, right, nearly 500,000 Indians entered into the region. This is a picture. You can see some of these pictures of actually what it looked like. And this is the first ship which entered into Guyana, the Whitby, in Berbice, May 5th, 1838. It left from Calcutta. Okay, but the trick was the indentured labor was almost like a form of slavery. It was brutal conditions. It was a crime to miss your work. They give you a certain task. You have to perform 5 tasks per week. They're cutting sugarcane, right? And this is how, that sugarcane was needed in Europe, sugar, right? This is how the wealth came into this part of the world. Cotton, tobacco, sugarcane. The conditions were horrible conditions. And even women were forced to cut the cane. And in many cases, the people were so poor and destitute that even after 5 years with a little bit of incentive, they ended up staying. So 90% of the people never went back to India. They stayed in the Americas. And surprisingly enough, and this is interesting, that the Muslim laborers who were there, they were being insulted by the Hindus and by the slave masters. In Trinidad, they would call you Mandingo. So they call you a Mandingo, you're a troublemaker, right? In Guyana, they say you Fulla man, which is a Fulani, right? And the Fulani or the Fulla, they were many of the great scholars of West Africa, the Islamic jihad movements that went on. It was the Fulla. The Mandingo were the early people to spread Islam in West Africa. These are names of honor and pride, but they were being used to insult people, the next wave. Okay? Now, the resistance amongst the Indian and Javanese or Indonesian indentured laborers, it was not a revolt, a physical revolt like the Africans. They resisted by maintaining their faith. They resisted by building little masjids, little houses of Allah, and they call maktab, a little madrasa, right? This is an example of it. They would build these as much as they possibly could. And it's surprising, when you travel in the world, you will see in other territories, this is a masjid on the left, which is the first masjid in Guyana, right? And then you'll see in the next slide, Mauritius and the Fiji Islands. They're very similar. See how close it is? So the same thing was happening in different parts of the world during the indentured labor period. The resistance was their identity. Maintain your identity. Because it was not slavery. So people's names were not changed. They could practice their religion in a very simple, humble way. So they resisted by maintaining it, by being involved in education, and later they were part of the resurgence of Islam in the 20th century. Now, what is not so well known here in the Americas is the Dutch indentured labor. The Dutch brought Indonesian, Javanese, and they brought them to a place called Suriname. In South America, you have British Guyana, French, and Dutch. Dutch is Suriname. And so this crowd here in the picture, if you can see that, this is not in Indonesia. This is in Suriname. Literally, these are Javanese Muslims. That's a masjid in Suriname. These are women in Suriname. They're Javanese, Malaysian. They have the largest proportion of Muslims in the whole of the Western world is in Suriname. And this is a well-kept secret because we really meet Suriname Muslims. They usually go to Holland because of the Dutch, right? You meet them in Holland and in other of the Dutch colonies. Okay, so that's the next wave. That's the indentured labor wave. The fourth wave, if I could put it like this, the economic migration. This was discussed earlier to a certain extent, 19th and 20th century. And these are people coming into the Americas. We have seen in Canada and in London an example of this. People who are fleeing from conscription in the Ottoman army. Also, it is an opportunity, to leave and to travel another part of the world. And surprisingly enough, the British and the British colonies had a relationship with the Ottoman Empire. But the only difference was, at that point in time, there was a color line. So because of the apartheid color line, the only immigration that they wanted in to Canada and to America at that point was a person of white complexion. It's something similar today, right? Go back home, right? Send her back, right? But where does the president's wife come from? How long have they been here? Think about this, right? No, it is because they don't consider people of color and Muslims, right, to be authentic, right? That's part of the confusion going on. But if people understand history, we will understand that these people left from that area, Syria, Lebanon, Albania, Bosnia, Turkey, many of those lands, and they traveled throughout the Americas. My topic is dealing with Central and South America. So when you look at the Arabs in Latin America, this is another well-kept secret. You'll be surprised to know that over 5% of Latin America is Arab. Roughly 25 to 30 million people, Arabic speaking. And if you know Arabic, actually, you're going to see in their names, right? You know the presidents in Brazil, right? The last one was called Michel Temer. Temer is a date, right? This one now, Jair Bolsonaro, right? And this is the Lebanese Syrian background people. So you will find that, it varies. I was shocked to find in Venezuela, right? There are over 100,000 Muslims in Venezuela. This picture here, look at that picture. This is not Dubai. That's not Abu Dhabi. That's Caracas, Venezuela. Look at the size of that masjid. See the traffic going next to it? This is a well-kept secret. There's over 100,000 Arabic-speaking Muslims, Lebanese, Palestinian, Syrians, Turkish. And in Colombia itself, we found the writings here on this, that Islam was spread under waving banners, right, written in Arabic. And so you'll find this information in different parts. Colombia itself, okay, in Colombia you'll find that according to a recent study, a population of 14,000 Muslims are there. And there are Muslims in Bogota and Santa Maria and many different sections there in Colombia. The largest number is Brazil. The Muslims flourished in Brazil. And I had the opportunity to go there amongst them, to see the masjids and the communities. This is the largest number of Arabic-speaking people in South America, over 11 million. Okay? And there's 6 to 7% of the Brazilian population. Okay? Also, you'll find the presence all over the islands, Central America. They say that the new president of El Salvador, the new president is an Arabic-speaking person. They say his father or his grandfather was an imam. President of El Salvador. Okay, so it's all over the region. Curacao, it's an island off of Venezuela. Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. The presence is all over the region. Okay? And that legacy, again, that Muslims stand out for Tawheed, Tahara, calling to the good and forbidding evil, Amr bil Maruf وَالنَّهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. The legacy continues. The legacy continues. And of course, to tie it in, like the other speaker, I want to tie it in also with Brother Malcolm, right? But many people did not see him. This is one of the pictures taken, near the end of his life, right? He didn't have a nice suit and a tie, right? How is he dressed? In the clothes of the ulama. What does he have? He has the book is in his hands, right? So this legacy continues. And three interesting points that we teach our younger generation is the 3 E's: education, empowerment, engagement. And so we need to educate ourselves in our Islamic studies, in our understanding of history. We need to educate ourselves in order to empower ourselves. It's not knowledge for knowledge's sake, but it is knowledge, what is called ilmun nafi', beneficial knowledge that will empower the younger generation when they are saying, go back home, you're an alien. No. If we understand our history, then we understand the importance and the presence of Muslims in America, and engage the society. And maybe, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would help us in these lands and would give us our rightful place in the Americas as an ancient people and a people who have always contributed to the onward flow of civilization. I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.